Before pop music became an industry, it was a revolution. And before that revolution had a name, it had four young men from Liverpool with guitars, accents, and something the world had never heard before. The Beatles didn't just write songs, they rewired how we feel music. They turned sound into identity, fandom into religion, and a local dream into a global awakening. But here's what most people forget. Their rise wasn't just about melody or fame. It was about timing. A post-war generation desperate for color, for escape, for rebellion, and four kids who somehow gave them all three. Behind the smiles and the screaming fans, there was burnout, rivalry, reinvention, and a quiet war over who the Beatles would become. This isn't just the story of the greatest band in history, it's the story of how four outsiders reshaped culture and then paid the price for it. How did the Beatles go from teenage dream to cultural revolutionaries, and what did it cost them and the world they changed? This is how the Beatles changed the world. In 1956, Britain still felt like it was trying to wake up from a long, gray dream. The Second World War had ended just over a decade earlier, but its shadow still stretched across the country. Bombed-out buildings scarred the cities, factories coughed out smoke, while young people clocked in for jobs they didn't want. On the radio, the songs were polite, crooners in suits, orchestras playing tunes your parents liked. Safe, predictable, clean, but something was building underneath. Quick reality check. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, a wild new sound had started to leak through the static. Chuck Berry's guitar riffs, Little Richard's screams, Elvis Presley shaking his hips on TV. It was loud, dangerous, and everything Britain's post-war youth had been waiting for. Hold that sound in your head. Now at Liverpool, a port city in the northwest of England, ships came and went every day carrying goods, gossip, and records from America. Rock and roll arrived there first. To most of the country, Liverpool was a working-class outpost, rough around the edges, but to a generation of restless kids, it was a gateway to the world. Here's the piece almost everyone misses. The Beatles weren't born into fame or privilege. They were built in those cracked streets, in small houses filled with radios and hope. John Lennon was the rebel, a sharp-tongued, quick wit, always pushing back. His mother, Julia, taught him to play banjo chords, but his childhood was marked by loss and longing. That edge you'd later hear in his voice. Paul McCartney was the dreamer. He had melody running through his blood. His father played jazz. His mother worked as a nurse, and Paul learned early how to turn emotion into tune. When John met Paul, it wasn't just friendship, it was chemistry. One wild, one grounded, one poetry, one structure. Together, they had the beginnings of something electric. George Harrison came next, quiet, serious, obsessed with the guitar. He was younger but technically sharper than both John and Paul. He practiced until his fingers bled, copying every American solo he could find on scratchy records. And then there was Ringo Starr, the survivor, a kid who spent his early years in and out of hospitals, always sick, always fighting. But behind the drums, he was steady. The heartbeat the band didn't know it needed. Quick reality check. In the late 50s, nobody thought four lads from Liverpool could matter. The big record labels were all in London. If you weren't polished or posh, you didn't stand a chance. But this was the pressure cooker, a city full of working-class kids who didn't see a future in factory life. They built their own guitars, cheap amplifiers, borrowed drums. They made music because there was nothing else to do. Before they were the Beatles, they were the Quarrymen playing skiffle, a raw mix of folk, jazz, and American rhythm. It was fast, messy, and fun, and it caught on. Young people across Britain were forming skiffle bands in garages, church halls, and coffee shops. It was DIY before DIY existed. Hold that sound in your head. Now add influence. Elvis on the radio, Buddy Holly's clean riffs, Little Richard's wildness. The boys soaked it all up like sponges. They copied, they experimented, they fought over who was best. Every night was a competition. Every gig a lesson. Here's the piece almost everyone misses. Their greatness didn't come from talent alone. It came from obsession, from the hours spent practicing in small rooms, from the hunger to escape the limits of Liverpool, from wanting more. By 1960, that hunger pushed them beyond their hometown. They went to Hamburg, Germany, a city filled with sailors, nightclubs, and noise. It was there they learned to perform for hours every night, hardened by smoke and sweat. The Beatles were forged on those stages long before they were famous. Meanwhile, back in Britain, the world was shifting. Teenagers were no longer just children. They were becoming a market. Fashion, film, and music were turning youth into power. The old guard didn't see it coming, but the cracks were already showing. And somewhere between the factories of Liverpool and the red lights of Hamburg, four boys figured out how to turn rebellion into rhythm. They didn't fall out of a label meeting. They were built in the working-class back streets of a broken city. By the time anyone knew their names, the parts were already dangerous. So when the world finally did hear them, it wasn't just a new band. It was a new sound, a new idea, a signal that everything was about to change. But change always comes with a cost, and that cost was waiting just around the corner. By 1962, something was shifting. The Beatles had been grinding for years. Hamburg nights, cheap hotels, endless rehearsals, and still no record deal. They'd been turned down by nearly every label in London. One executive even told them guitar groups are on the way out. But they didn't stop. They couldn't. Then a chance meeting changed everything. A local record shop owner named Brian Epstein kept hearing teenagers asking for a band called the Beatles. He went to see them live at the Cavern Club, a sweaty, crowded basement in Liverpool. What he saw wasn't polished. It was raw, loud, wild, but it had something else: control within chaos. After that night, the room tilted. Epstein signed on as their manager. He cleaned up their image, got them suits, haircuts, and direction. But he didn't touch the music, because underneath the new look, there was still the same fire. Freeze the frame. Listen to that sound one more time. Lennon's edge, McCartney's melody, Harrison's precision, Ringo's drive. Together, it wasn't just noise. It was personality turned into rhythm. Their first real chance came when producer George Martin took a gamble on them at EMI's Parlophone label. He was classically trained, not exactly a rock fan, but he heard potential. The first single, Love Me Do, scraped the charts. It was a start. But what came next would set off the explosion. Please Please Me, released in 1963, hit the UK like a lightning bolt. In under a year, it was everywhere. Jukeboxes, radio, dance halls, and suddenly Liverpool wasn't just a port city anymore. It was the center of the pop universe. Quick reality check. At that time, the charts were filled with safe, sugary pop songs, music that parents approved of. Then came the Beatles, grinning like troublemakers, singing harmonies that hit your chest. It didn't sound like a new act. It sounded like a weapon. Numbers don't tell it, but this clip does. Crowds screaming so loud the band couldn't hear themselves play. Girls crying, fainting, chasing their car through the streets. Beatlemania wasn't just fandom. It was mass emotion, unleashed. And then the backlash landed. Critics called it hysteria, a fad, even dangerous. Newspapers said they were corrupting youth. Politicians dismissed them as noise. But the kids didn't care. They'd already chosen their heroes. In 1964, America finally caught the fever. When the Beatles stepped off that plane at JFK Airport, 3,000 fans were waiting, screaming their names. The next night, they played The Ed Sullivan Show. 73 million people watched. That's over a third of the entire U.S. population at the time. For comparison, that's more people than tuned in for the moon landing 5 years later. Freeze the frame. This wasn't just a band on TV. It was Britain invading America through sound. Clean suits, bowl haircuts, and harmonies sharp enough to cut through history. The performance shattered everything within days. They had the top 5 songs on the Billboard chart, something no one had ever done before. The Beatles weren't following trends anymore, they were the trend. Here's the piece almost everyone misses. Beatlemania wasn't just about music, it was about timing. The world was ready to change, politically, culturally, emotionally. The Cold War, the Civil Rights Movement, the rise of youth culture, all of it created the perfect storm, and the Beatles became the soundtrack to that storm. Their image, the hair, the humor, the charm, became symbols of rebellion wrapped in innocence. They made it okay to be different, to question authority, to dream louder. Quick reality check. Meanwhile, across the Atlantic, American rock and roll had started to fade. Elvis was in Hollywood. The first wave was losing steam. The Beatles didn't just bring rock back, they rebuilt it. But fame came fast, and fame came heavy. Every tour was bigger, every crowd was louder. They couldn't go anywhere without being mobbed. Planes, hotels, police barricades, their lives became a blur of noise and lights. And here's the strange truth. While the world was falling in love with the Beatles were already starting to lose themselves inside the machine. The music was growing, the hysteria was growing, but so was the distance between who they were and who they had to be. They'd sparked the biggest youth movement in modern history, and now they were trapped inside it. The question wasn't whether they'd change the world they already had. The question was how much longer they could survive it. By 1965, the Beatles had conquered everything they once dreamed of. They'd sold out stadiums, broken chart records, and turned teenage screams into a global language. But inside the band, something was changing. The fame that once felt electric was starting to feel hollow. Night after night, they couldn't even hear themselves over the noise of their own success. That's where the revolution began, not in front of a crowd, but away from it. Quick reality check. By the mid-60s, most pop acts were still chasing singles, formula hits that could live or die on the radio. But the Beatles were starting to see the studio as more than a recording space. It became their lab, their playground, their weapon. Hold that thought, because this is where music itself changes. The shift started with Rubber Soul in 1965. The sound got deeper, more personal. Instead of love songs built for dancing, they wrote songs built for thinking. You could feel John's honesty in My Life, Paul's sweetness in Michelle, George's growing curiosity for other cultures. The production became more layered, richer bass tones, tighter harmonies, lyrics that hinted at something bigger than romance. Freeze the frame. Listen to the bass line in Drive My Car. It's not just following the chords, it's leading the melody, dancing with the vocal. Paul's bass wasn't background anymore, it was its own melody machine. That swing underneath made everything move. One studio trick you can't unhear. After this, George Martin, their producer, used to record the vocals and instruments separately, then bounce them together across multiple tape machines. It gave the Beatles that shimmering, slightly surreal sound, almost like the world bending around the music, and that's where copycats never quite felt right. You could mimic their chords, but not their chemistry. By Revolver in 1966, they went even further. Songs like Tomorrow Never Knows didn't sound like rock and roll anymore. They sounded like the future. Hypnotic drum loops, reversed guitars, vocal effects that made John sound like he was singing through a dream. That wasn't an accident. They'd started experimenting with tape speeds, running parts backwards, even cutting and reassembling reels by hand. Solo the drums for a second, Ringo's feel on Rain, and Come Together later on. It's slightly behind the beat, heavy but lazy, human but mechanical. That push and pull became the heartbeat of modern groove. It's the sound of someone breathing inside the rhythm. Here's the piece almost everyone misses. They weren't just selling music, they were selling permission. The Beatles gave kids the right to reinvent themselves, to grow, to experiment, to be weird in public. Every new single was a message that said, it's okay to change. By 1967, the message had turned psychedelic. Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band wasn't just an album, it was a universe, a concept, a character, a mood. They blurred the line between band and art project. The idea was, what if we stop being the Beatles for a while and become someone else entirely? George Martin went full architect here. Orchestras, sound effects, tape loops, a kaleidoscope of color built from machines. He wasn't just producing records anymore, he was designing sonic worlds. Listen to A Day in the Life, one half Lennon's Dream Diary, the other half McCartney's daily routine, stitched together with a 40-piece orchestra sliding up into chaos. It's beauty and confusion colliding, the perfect reflection of the 1960s. Quick reality check. This was the same band that once sang Love Me Do. Now they were writing symphonies about mortality, war, and wonder, and their audience followed them every step of the way. The Beatles didn't just evolve, they dragged popular culture forward with them. Their fashion, their speech, their curiosity, everything became trend-setting. Suddenly, it was cool to grow your hair long, to question authority, to think differently. They changed slang, headlines, even what pop stars could talk about. Parents complained, kids copied. Every haircut, every chord change was a small act of rebellion. But under all that myth, the real secret weapon was still the craft. Paul's bass carried the melody. John's rhythm guitar added grit and danger. George's leads brought structure and space. Ringo's drumming glued it all together. Steady, clever, never overplaying. And George Martin, the fifth Beatle, turned their ideas into sound that could live forever. Here's what makes it timeless. Those harmonies weren't perfect, the guitars weren't always clean, but the imperfections gave it life. That's why it still hits. The Beatles didn't chase perfection, they chased feeling. And the more they experimented, the more the world tried to catch up. They made music that demanded you listen, not just dance. And in doing so, they made pop music into something it had never been before. Art, but every revolution comes with a shadow. Behind the color and creativity, tensions were rising. The same freedom that made them unstoppable was starting to pull them apart. The question wasn't whether they could top themselves again. It was how long before the weight of the myth and the machine would break the band.
This video is sponsored by the Lore Store on Amazon, your one-stop shop for music lovers across reggae, rock, pop, and hip-hop. We built it for real listeners who don't want to dig through 1,000 listings to find the right gear. Inside the Lore Store, you'll find 5 aisles. VIP, top, battle-tested essentials. Headphones, turntables, speakers, gig-safe earplugs, smart speakers. Reggae vibe, roots and lovers. Rock made easy, automatic decks, warm bookshelf speakers, vinyl care. Rock lore, classic rock must-haves. Open back cans, simple amps, living room concert vibes. Pop lore, feel-good everyday setups, clean, clear speakers, easy streaming, nostalgia-friendly picks. Hip-hop must-haves, punchy bass without the muddle, closed-back headphones and living room systems that handle low-end, plus a rotating crate of old album vinyl if you're rebuilding a 60s-90s collection. Every product page tells you who it's for, 3 pros, 1 con, and why we picked it. So you can choose with confidence. Flying soon? Check. VIP for noise canceling that tames plane roar. Mostly listening at home? Try open-back headphones that let live albums breathe. Want instant gratification vinyl? Our fully automatic turntable is 1 button from silence to music, and the record cleaning kit knocks down crackle so the bass tightens up. Headed to shows? Grab high-fidelity earplugs. Hands-free at home? Our smart speaker picks let you say, play 70s reggae or classic pop, and you're there. Deal alert! If you use the link in the description, you'll land on our curated picks with current best available Amazon pricing and active discounts where applicable. Prices change, so buy now to lock in today's deal. Tap the link in the description, pick your aisle, grab a favorite, and tell me which category you want me to build next. The Lore Store. Listen better, with gear that gets out of the way and lets the music live.
By 1967, the Beatles weren't just the biggest band in the world, they were the world. Their faces were on posters, their words printed like gospel, their every move copied, questioned, and worshipped. But behind the glow of that global spotlight, something else was happening. The higher they climbed, the heavier it got. We're going to sit with this for a second. The math of fame was brutal. Years of constant touring, studio sessions stacked on top of each other, interviews, photo shoots, film projects, label meetings. There were no breaks. Between 1963 and 1966, the Beatles played over 1,400 concerts in barely 3 years. Every city, every continent, every time zone. No sleep, no silence, just screams. And the screams started to drown out the music. By the time Revolver hit, the band could barely hear themselves on stage. The sound systems couldn't compete with the crowd. It became absurd. They'd stop playing mid-song just to see if anyone noticed. No one ever did. That's when they decided no more touring. The Beatles were going to hide inside the studio, their new world, their only safe place. But even inside that safe place, pressure followed. The world wanted more than music now. They wanted answers. Quick reality check. 1967 wasn't a calm year. The Vietnam War was tearing America apart. Protests filled the streets. Civil rights marches met resistance. Nuclear fears still haunted every headline. The youth of the world were restless and they needed direction. The Beatles, whether they wanted it or not, had become their prophets. All You Need Is Love wasn't just a song, it was a manifesto. Broadcast to over 400 million people around the world, it became the unofficial anthem of a generation that was done with war, done with control, done with pretending. The Beatles weren't politicians, but their music carried more influence than most presidents. Hold that thought, because this is where the story tilts. The search for peace led them east to India, to the Maharishi Mahesh Yogi and the practice of transcendental meditation. After the acid-fueled chaos of the psychedelic years, meditation promised clarity, a clean slate. It was meant to heal, but even there, fame followed them. Photographers, reporters, fans, the circus never stopped. The escape became another performance. Still, that journey changed their sound, their mindset, and the way Western culture saw spirituality. Sitar music on pop radio, Eastern philosophy in teenage bedrooms, that all started with them. They didn't just play with sitars and mantras for trend's sake. They helped open the Western mind to an entirely new world of thought. But enlightenment couldn't save them from each other. This is the part fans don't put on t-shirts. Behind the posters was a price tag: sleep, blood, sanity. Fame became claustrophobia. Business decisions turned into wars. The death of their longtime manager, Brian Epstein, in 1967 was the beginning of the end. He'd been the quiet balance, the adult in the room, and without him, things started to fall apart. Listen to how the tempo feels heavier now. Without Epstein, they struggled to manage themselves. Legal battles, money problems, and ego clashes filled the space that used to hold music. John drifted toward activism and art with Yoko Ono, searching for meaning beyond melody. Paul tried to keep the group focused, to push them forward creatively. George wanted more spiritual freedom, more of his own songs. Ringo, the soul of the band, just wanted peace. Meanwhile, the outside world was changing faster than anyone could keep up. The summer of love gave way to the darker realities of the late 60s. Assassinations, protests, drugs, disillusionment. The optimism that had once defined their music started to fade. They made The White Album raw, fragmented, brilliant, but uneasy. It sounded like 4 solo artists trapped in the same room. Each song felt like its own planet, orbiting around a star that was already burning out. And then came Let It Be. What was supposed to be a back-to-basics project turned into a slow-motion breakup caught on film. The tension was visible. You could see the cracks in their friendship, the exhaustion in their eyes. The magic was still there, but so was the weight of everything they'd built. Behind the scenes, lawyers were drawing lines, managers were choosing sides, and trust, the thing that had carried them from Liverpool to the world, was disappearing. Here's the truth most legends share: they don't fade, they detonate. By 1970, the Beatles ended. No big announcement, no farewell concert, just silence. One by one, they walked away, and just like that, the band that had changed the sound, style, and soul of the world was over. Most acts fade. The Beatles didn't fade, they detonated. That's why the legend froze young instead of growing safe. But the fall didn't kill the dream, it preserved it. The Beatles stopped existing, but their influence never did. The message outlived the mess. So the real question isn't how the Beatles ended, it's how their story kept going long after they were gone.
Hey, Rocklore community. Before we continue, let's have a real talk for a second, bro. You know, this isn't just a channel to us. And I hope it's not just a place you come to watch a video and then forget about it. This is a community. It's a place where we get to dig up the secrets of rock and roll, share our favorite riffs, and celebrate the artists who maybe didn't get the love they deserved. Right now, only about 1% of our viewers are subscribed. We can change that together and grow this community. All you have to do is hit that subscribe button with the notification bell on. When you do, you're not just helping a channel grow, you're becoming a member of the Rocklore family. You're signaling to us and to YouTube that these stories matter, that this music is worth preserving, and that this community is a place you want to be. Subscribing is your way of making sure you're always in the loop. It means you'll be the first to know when we unearth a forgotten legend, drop a new countdown, or dive into a piece of rock history you've never heard before. So if you're a true fan of the lore, if you get that same feeling of discovery that I do, then come join us. It takes 1 second to be a part of something bigger.
When the Beatles ended in 1970, it didn't feel real. How could something that big, that loud, that alive just stop? For fans, the silence after their breakup was like a world without color. Newspapers called it the end of an era, but that was too small. The Beatles weren't just a band, they were They were a language, and even after they stopped speaking, that language kept echoing. Because here's the thing, endings don't always mean the story is over. Sometimes they just mean the story is everywhere. Let's rewind to the aftermath. John, Paul, George, and Ringo each took a different road. 4 solo voices that still carried the same DNA. John Lennon became the activist, the poet with a bullhorn. Imagine wasn't just a song, it was a prayer disguised as pop. He believed music could heal. That piece wasn't just a dream if enough people believed it. Paul McCartney built wings, chasing melody like oxygen. He proved he didn't need the Beatles to keep shaping pop. He just was pop. His songs filled radios, movies, and stadiums through the 70s, bridging 2 generations at once. George Harrison took the quiet path, but All Things Must Pass when his first solo album said everything he'd been holding in for years. Spiritual, raw, painfully honest. He turned grief and enlightenment into chords that still sound like healing. And Ringo, the soul of the band, kept drumming, kept smiling, and somehow kept it real. He played with everyone from Tom Petty to the all-star band. He was the heart that never stopped beating. 4 paths, same echo. Now spot the lineage. Hear how their fingerprints are still on everything. Oasis built their entire sound on Beatles DNA. Blur borrowed the charm. Radiohead, the courage to experiment. Kanye sampled Because. Tame Impala channels Revolver. Even Billie Eilish, with her whisper vocals and haunting harmonies, owes something to what the Beatles built. Every time a band blends genres, experiments in the studio, or writes about peace instead of perfection, you're hearing the Beatles' aftershocks. They didn't just influence musicians, they influenced mindsets. They proved you could be popular and profound at the same time. That pop could be art, that music could be rebellion without raising its voice. Let's nudge this forward, because the legacy didn't stop in vinyl grooves. It evolved with every remix, every reissue, every cover, from documentaries to tribute concerts, from murals in Liverpool to TikTok trends. Their story keeps rebooting itself for each new generation. And what's wild, kids who weren't even born when Lennon was alive can sing Hey Jude word for word. They don't need to know the history to feel it. That's what timeless sounds like. But here's a curiosity question for you. Why do they still matter now? Why in 2025, when music is everywhere, do we still go back to them? Maybe it's because the world keeps repeating the same noise: fame, chaos, division, and the Beatles remind us what happens when four people choose harmony instead. Their songs are empathy disguised as melody. Every chorus still invites you in. Every verse feels like a hand on your shoulder saying, "You're not alone." And maybe that's the real legacy, not the records sold or the awards won, but the fact that they left us a blueprint for creativity, for peace, for unity, in a time when the world keeps forgetting how to find it. So if you're hearing this decades later, maybe it's your turn now. Your turn to listen closer, your turn to chase the echo, your turn to pass it on. Before the Beatles, pop music sounded simple, safe. After them, everyone was chasing possibility. Even artists who've never heard a full album are living in the world they built. If you were there, you already knew. If you weren't, now you do. So tell me, what's rewrote? What was the first Beatles song that hit you in the chest? Was it Let It Be? Yesterday? Something? Drop your pick in the comments. I'm building a playlist from your answers. And if you want more stories that shaped music as we know it, the revolutions, the heartbreaks, the sounds that changed everything, you're in the right place. This is Bonham, Page and Payin, where music history breathes again. Subscribe so this story and others like it don't get buried by the algorithm. Hit the next episode, where we trace how another band took the torch from the Beatles and pushed it somewhere nobody expected, because history doesn't repeat, it remixes.